Hello, friends. This is Professor Googlov. Today's video will be a little unusual, but I'm sure you will like it. So, get comfortable and let's go. Who are the Vikings? From about 800 to the 11th century, a colossal number of Scandinavians left their homelands in search of prosperity in other lands. Yes, as you can imagine, we're talking about the seafaring warriors known to everyone as Vikings. At first, this people tried to develop by raiding coastal areas. In this way they took away some of the food, some household supplies and were able to secure their existence. Soon the demands increased, and under their onslaught various monasteries, sections of northern Russia and the Baltic began to suffer. The Vikings attacked those places where there was a treasure trove of gold. Thus began the story of these warriors who would leave their mark as pirates, raiders, traders and settlers across much of Britain and many other countries over the next few centuries. Here someone might think that the Vikings were a whole race, but contrary to many expectations, this was not the case. Vikings are the most ordinary Scandinavians. Only now you should not equate all Scandinavians with Vikings. It's important to feel the line here. Well, groups of these warriors usually consisted of acquaintances from their native land, from one town or village. Most all Vikings who have left their mark on history have roots in Denmark, Norway and Sweden. Their common ground and what set them apart from the European peoples they encountered was that they came from a foreign land, they were not civilized, in the local sense of the word, and, most importantly, they were not Christian. By the way, few people know, but the word Viking itself came from the ancient Scandinavian word, vik, which formed the root of the word Vikinger, meaning pirate. The exact reason why the Scandinavians decided to wander the world and engage in piracy remains unclear. Some believe it was due to overpopulation in their homeland. Others agree that people just simply wanted riches and were desperate for such measures. Especially, the second version looks even more plausible against the background of the fact that in the 8th century AD Europe was gradually becoming richer and richer. As time went on, the Vikings' trade routes began to grow, and with it, their standard of living. So, because Scandinavian furs were highly valued, Europe brought the Vikings to a new level by telling them about sailing technology. And, as it turned out, Europe told them about it for a reason. It was favorable for some Europeans that Vikings developed and, thus, attacked the enemies who were some mired in conflicts and problems. Actually, this is what happened. From 793 AD the Vikings made their first visit to the monastery of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumberland in northeastern England. For several decades, the Vikings limited their raids to coastal targets in the British Isles and Europe. Then they took advantage of internal conflicts in Europe to expand inland. After the death of Louis the Pious, Emperor of Francia, modern France and Germany, in 840, his son Lothar actually invited a Viking fleet for support in a power struggle with his brothers. Soon other Vikings realized that the Frankish rulers were willing to pay them large sums of money to keep them from attacking their subjects, making Francia a target for further Viking activity. Somehow their adventures across Europe continued like that. Every year Vikings successfully showed themselves from the best side. They were a powerful army, which was feared not only by small villages, but also by large cities. The thirst for earnings guided them and helped them to achieve their goals. However, without noticing it, stretched literally all over Europe, the Vikings began to lose their true, native, culture. Scandinavian seafarers were left to start families with ordinary Europeans, causing the blood to mix and the number of people willing to wander the world to dwindle. Thus, around the 11th century, all the Scandinavian kingdoms were Christian, and what was left of the Viking culture was absorbed into the culture of Christian Europe. Today, one can travel to Iceland to see their footprints and see the extensive literature and Icelandic sagas in which they celebrated the greatest victories of their glorious past. Vikings could sleep with other people's wives. And right away we jump into a rather contradictory, but very curious fact. Many sources say that among these desperate Scandinavians it was considered normal to spend the night with other people's wives. They did not pay much attention to it and were free to conduct equal exchanges, in the name of diversity and distraction from worries. In addition to the fun component, such an action made sense in case one of the warriors passed away during another raid or something larger. In such a case, the wife could count on a close relationship with this very exchange husband, hoping for his financial help in times of need. Vikings believed in zombies and made love over corpses. The people had a fear that if they buried someone in violation of the rites, the person who had gone to the other world, or rather his ghost, would return in the guise of an evil spirit who would want to take someone else with him. That is why they carefully buried the dead, burning the bodies or burying them in the ground. First, the body of the deceased was buried in the ground for 10 days, and then dug up and buried again. If the object of the funeral was a supreme ruler, a special slave girl was put underground with him. According to the legend, such a girl was given dope and taken to a tent where a recently dug-up corpse was waiting for her. One of the participants in the ritual made love to the slave and strangled her in the process. As soon as she lost consciousness, he would quickly put her next to the corpse and the assistants would bury them both. The Vikings were devotees of brutal torture. Judging by the legend with the slave and the burial of the supreme rulers, you might get the impression that the Vikings were a bit of a dick. In fact, this is quite likely, as these people liked cruel torture, and this is a fact. Their most famous execution was the Blood Eagle execution. This execution was carried out on enemies and traitors by sacrificing them to Odin. The person was placed face down on a stone. The ribs were cracked open with an axe. The ribs were opened and the lungs were pulled out. The victim died of shock. The story goes that 2 kings were killed by this method. The Vikings' crazy fantasy doesn't end there, don't think. Here is another example of their execution hanging bolt, when a person was sacrificed to the same Odin in the forest. The most shameful execution of the Vikings was the burning of the house. For intractable enemies there was the torture of Heimir, when a man's arms and legs were cut off, his wounds were healed and he was carried around to intimidate them. It is believed that this fate befell the Norwegian king Magnus Erlingsson. Vikings drank wine from the skulls of their enemies. Whether on the background of such cruel types of execution, or for some other reason, but people began to put down and such in relation to the Vikings. In general, this theory at the time of its appearance was not something new, because there are many examples in history when human skulls were used to make various vessels. Similar dabbled Scythians, Mongols, Chinese, Europeans, Slavs and Japanese. Most likely, some Vikings could also make cups from skulls. However, it is unlikely that making dishes from defeated enemies was a mass phenomenon. The myth may have arisen because Ole Worm, a Danish physician and naturalist, mistranslated a fragment of the poem in his 1651 book. In ancient Scandinavian it said, "Drink beer rather from the curved branches of skulls." Curved branches of skulls is a kenning, a metaphor meaning horn. Worm translated the fragment as, "The heroes hoped to drink in Odin's hall from the skulls of those they had killed." Well, as I promised, the video was interesting. So, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.